So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and to another battle replay that's on a new map. So, like I said previously, it will be a pretty good litmus test to see if my crashing issues are going to subside with a few changes that I have made. A few patches and a few different things that I'm going to be doing to try and make the crashing less of an issue, at least that's what I hope. This is also a map which should induce a little bit less crashing, because here people won't be able to give in to the temptation of putting far too many trees, bushes and fences down, which does impact on the game, ironically enough. But yeah, this is DUMGRISTS 2, and this is going to be a rather interesting map because it is effectively a cityscape in terms of layout, although obviously there's very little in the way of buildings here. It's a lot more of it is just based around these rather natural fortifications in these cliffs and rocks that look almost like they've been dug out of the mountain manually to sort of form this natural fortress. And it is going to be evil on the defense today. They are the ones that hold on to this place. I'm not sure if this is actually something which exists in Middle-earth, DUMGRISTS 2. I don't think so, but then my knowledge of the lore is also rather limited. We can't actually go into the area way back here, so all of the battle will actually take place in the stone walls, effectively, of the centre of this map. And it will be interesting to see how they decide to hang on to this, because it's a big area with a lot of wider open spaces for the defenders to try and hold on to. And while they are evil factions and they should have access to a bit more in terms of numbers, it is still going to be fairly difficult for them to keep every angle as covered as they will need to stop the attackers from having their way with them. Speaking of the attackers, it is Eclipse once again, who has sent me the battle replay, who is very eager for me to do one of these replays. And again, I will reiterate, please don't try and pressure me over personal messages to do your replays faster. I am trying my best to do them as quickly as I possibly can. I am moving as fast as I'm physically able. I'm giving up most of my free time in order to produce the content that my channel lives off of. So please don't try to pile the pressure on, because it's not a case of me sort of just not putting in enough effort. It's simply that I do not have the time to move any faster than I am, and I have many replays I need to get through. I'm always happy to take more, of course, but you know, this is the situation. Please don't do it, because I'll take a dim view of it, to be honest with you. So he's playing as Numenor, and he's got a couple of units here of Belagaya footmen, so the basic spears that Numenor have access to. Numenor, of course, do have a little bit... well, they have a small roster in general, and they certainly have fewer options when it comes to their cheaper units, but the Belagaya footmen can fill that role a little bit, you know, more easily than many of their other units. And as long as you back them up with some of their strong units, the Belagaya footmen will do a decent job of standing and fighting. We also have some Seafarers of Nindamos, my personal favourite unit from Numenor, because they too are not that expensive, but they can dish out an incredible amount of damage to an individual unit with their javelins, and then they can get into melee and be decent makeshift line infantry as well. So a very good all-purpose unit here with their scale mail armour that they have. In behind them, however, we have Numenor's dedicated line infantry unit, the mighty Romena Abarim. Now obviously this unit is very, very powerful in a prolonged melee fight, especially in a situation like this where they're going to be operating in choke points quite a lot. They actually have a little bit less defensive skill than some of the other similar units, such as the Alcarondas Legion from Umbar, but they more than make up for that with better attack values, and that honestly gives them the ability to dish out far more damage than most other units of line infantry do. I would still say that units like the Imladris Guardians and the Noldorin Guard from Linden and Imladris have probably got a slight edge on a unit like this, but it's honestly not by much, and the Romena Abarim can be brought in greater numbers as well, so there is a case for saying actually that factions like Numenor and Umbar are able to bring a more solid line infantry corps simply because they're able to field more of them more easily than factions like the Elves, but obviously that's very subjective and that can change based on composition. But for here, a unit of quality like this is going to be very useful for hacking and slashing their way through the orcs and evil men on the defence. There's also the Romena Nardukadar, which can also hold their own against infantry because they are of course higher end armour piercing spears, much like the type that Gondor have in the shape of the Citadel Guard. Very, very useful unit to have, because of course not only can they muck in melee against other infantry, which is something many other spears kind of struggle to do efficiently, but also, of course, they are even better against cavalry. That armour piercing does apply to them as well, of course, which means any cavalry that lingers too long is going to end up dying very, very quickly. Not that that would be too much of a problem on this kind of map, you'd imagine. They are still going to be very useful for their shield wall as well. Belagaya pikemen, obviously this is a very basic pike in many ways, but they're still a very good anchor for Numenor to have. Definitely a good thing to help shore up your perhaps more limited infantry with, preventing them from getting overwhelmed, at least from the front, of course. From the sides, they're still very vulnerable. And of course, unlike most of Numenor's mainline stuff, which has good armour and shields, the Belagaya pikemen a little bit more exposed, especially without the armour upgrade that they have here. Very much their bane is going to be archers. The unit just in behind them, however, doesn't suffer from that because they have much better armour and shields, very rare for a pikeman, but the Naruna Aru Sentinels are another really good centre for the Numenor line, not only for all the reasons that higher tier pikes are, they obviously kill things quite quickly considering their stats are lower than most other kinds of infantry, but also the fact that they are an inspiration unit as well, that morale battery that you have in the middle of your army. Numenor have got pretty decent morale overall anyway, but it never hurts to have a buffing unit in the middle to prevent your army from running away en masse. Then we also have some Remena Boabarim over here, so obviously the armour-piercing archers, so not going for quantity in terms of the archers. Other factions that are on the field today can certainly do that instead of Numenor. Instead, going for the armour-piercing. Obviously very limited ammunition on these guys, but if you can pour a lot of fire into a particular area quickly, they're going to be able to do some real damage to the defence. And then finally, the Pharazim Swordmaster is obviously a really strong, heavy swordsman. They of course General's bodyguards here, and there is our Pharazon himself with his golden pope hat. Obviously they're a very, very strong unit, and probably the closest thing the Noldorin Blade Masters have to themselves. Them and the Temple Executioners can really give the best the elves have a run for their money, which gives you an idea of their overall quality. The second army, we have Dollar Elf, who's going to be playing as Arthedain, so the descendants of Numenor. He's got some Arthedain marksmen, so he of course has gone for some sort of small standard archers with the breastplate armour upgrade as well, just to make them a little tougher. Not too surprising, obviously it gives them the ability to skirmish with the enemy should the need arise, and Arthedain are very good at that. They have a lot of options when it comes to their archers. A couple of units of Dunedain Peacekeepers, I'm a big fan of them as well, because much like the Remena about him before them, they have very, very nice damage with those axes that they wield. Overall, there aren't too many of them per unit as well. They are fairly expensive, and ultimately, unlike the Remena about him, because they are wielding axes, they do have slightly lower melee defense, and they have lower armor values as well. But even so, a very good very good unit for Arthedain to have access to. Speaking of armour, we do have some fully upgraded Arthedain men at arms just in behind, a very good bread and butter unit just to have on the front line. Unlike the Remena about him, they won't set the world on fire with how much damage they can do, but they're a very dependable unit to have at the centre, especially fully upgraded as they are. We have some Evendim Spears, the unit that always makes up the numbers for Arthedain. Like Arthedain will always try and save a little bit of money by bringing some of their lower end units because they have some pretty decent options there, and the Evendim Spearmen are most certainly that. Very good for as far as a militia spear unit goes. In this sort of situation, they very much will be the closest thing the attackers have to cannon fodder though, alongside the civilians here, but still a pretty good unit to bring. Dismounted Knights for Numinous, obviously buffing the morale as well, multiple HP, really, really strong when you get them into the mix. And then also some Arthedain Pikemen and some Wardens of the North, the Arthedain Pikemen with the armour upgrade as well, just to make them a little bit more resilient to all forms of damage. And of course the Wardens of the North as well, armour piercing on them, that's where the General's going to be. Very, very good again at dealing with single target entities. And then finally, we also have the Royal Court of House Amlaith actually, so the not the Knights of Arthedain, they are the multiple HP Lancers. We'll see if they can actually be used effectively in this sort of settlement. They could, because there are some wide open spaces, and it's always good to have that option to get in behind enemy lines and start hammer and anviling them, because if the defenders have to put up with that, very often they lose. It's just quite difficult to actually get into the position where you can do that. Then we have Froggy, who's going to be playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, not Erebor this time, which is refreshing. I do think Erebor, Khazad-dûm are more difficult to play than Erebor now, because Erebor, they're a very forgiving faction to play as, with how strong their cavalry and their crossbows are. Not the luxuries you have as Khazad-dûm, although you do have slightly stronger infantry than them. Khazad-dûm, obviously, alongside Imladris, are among some of the strongest infantry in the game. Dwarven Miners, the closest thing they have to cannon fodder. Armour-piercing militia units are quite rare. We also have some upgraded 4th Legion Shield Guards, so some very strong Dwarven Spears to make up the core of their army. We have some Warriors of Khazad-dûm, the closest thing they have to just a standard line infantry unit, but they're still stronger than any standard line infantry units from the Kingdoms of Men. And of course, if that wasn't enough, they also have a better option in the form of the 3rd Legion, especially with the armour upgrade. They are really, really strong, much like the Remena about him we saw earlier on. The General's going to be in the Guards of Khazad-dûm, which with their 3 hit points is not too surprising. They're almost bulletproof with how powerful, with how tough they are. A couple of Orc Hunters as well, so even more archers to put the pressure on. And I think that's just about it. There could be some hidden units around here as well, although Khazad-dûm don't have much stuff that can hide. Ah, there it is. A clump over here, which I thought was part of the other army, but he has got some Mithril Guard, Sons of the Fallen, more 3rd Legion, and some more Warriors, as well as some more 4th Legion. So they're going to be going this way. Another way into the settlement over here is this. Kind of looks like it on the map, but oh yeah, so there is a small gap that leads into the settlement this way, which Mirkwood are going to be taking. BMK Overlord of the Dark Cloud, he has brought some Ents, he's got a lot of upgraded Hiri units, including the Hiri Lung. Does he have any spears in there? We should be able to see them poking up over the top. He's definitely got some Hiri Peng, I can see them. He's got some Elder Council, he has got some Blades of Emenduir. Does he have some Hiri Auth? Yes, he does. There's probably General's Bodyguard units in there as well somewhere. Maybe Wardens of Amon Lank, maybe Elders of the Elven King. Palace Guard would be a good choice in this battle as well, just because of how ridiculously powerful they can be in a prolonged melee fight against lower end units, which the evil factions are probably going to have to rely on a little bit more so, just to make up the numbers here. But we shall see. Moving on to the defenders. Way back here, we have Isengard, who are going to be played by Langer. He's got some Trolls of the White Hand and some Uruk-hai pikemen. He has also got some Dunlending clansmen. There is cavalry on the field, so potentially they could be kind of useful. They've also got the armour upgrade, meaning they get the luxury of having helmets and a bit of chainmail. And then we also have an Isengard Ballista, of course, which in this sort of situation where there's a lot of choke points, if you can get an Isengard Ballista into the right spot, it can be absolutely devastating, a match winner on its own. We shall see if they are allowed to do that. Can't see the rest of their armies because they haven't popped into play yet. A lot of it's going to be hidden, obviously, behind the walls and deeper into the settlement. Blindness is going to be playing as Rudau, and he's got some Rudau swordsmen guarding the front line. Back over here, he's also got some Dunman spears. Is this his general? It's not, but it is the Franadine Berserkers nonetheless, a very strong unit of effectively shock infantry with how they are mechanically. They may have a shield, but they still function more like two-handed axemen in melee than anything else with their ridiculously high damage and armor piercing. They also throw an axe into melee, well, throw an axe at the enemy before charging into melee. Dunman spears, and then over here we also have some Rudau swordsmen. The final army is going to be Angmar, which I think we can see a little bit more of. We have Mr. Sneakman, who's got some witches, again on a map like this. They can be absolutely devastating. We have some Witch-Realm Blackguard, we have some Scourge Raiders, we also have some Guardians of Khan Doom, Witch-Realm Pikemen. Lots of Trolls, as Angmar are wont to bring, because obviously they can be very useful for breaking the assaults up, and also some Angmar Halberds. And with that, I think I will make a cut, because it will take the attacks a little while to march through the trenches, which lead into what used to be a mountain range, I would assume, before it was dug out by someone. I suppose if you've got a legion of orcs at your disposal, you can, manpower ain't really a worry. But I will make a cut here, and we will rejoin when the first of the engagements begins. So interestingly enough, not actually as big a cut as I was kind of expecting with how disparate some of the starting positions were, but I suppose Mirkwood are going to be able to run down this very narrow chasm quite quickly here, with the Ents leading the way, and Isengard are going to be moving forward here to try and meet their advance. It's actually a matchup which is fairly tough for Isengard, I think. In general, I think Mirkwood in melee certainly will have a big advantage over what Isengard can provide, but it is actually interesting as well. Isengard have moved forward to meet the challenge of Mirkwood moving through this little gap, but in doing so they've also somewhat surrendered the high ground to Mirkwood here, and Mirkwood will be able to get their very deadly archers into a position to fire down onto the Isengard defenders, and rather worryingly, BMK is deciding to lead the way with his Greenwood Rangers, which is bad news for Isengard if they can't shut them down quickly. Isengard, of course, do have clear shots with their crossbowmen and their javelins and their own body-piercing archers as well, actually. You can see there already the Lurtz hunting pack already ripping into the rather big blob of Mirkwood forces that are getting in the way, and this could work out quite nicely here for Isengard if they are able to pin Mirkwood in place for an extended period of time, but that is a rather big if, because there's a slew of Mirkwood infantry and archers pouring into this choke point, and Ents, and it's going to take far more than just a couple of units of Uruk-hai Raiders to hold them back for all that long, to be honest with you. And you can see here that Mirkwood are already getting into a position on the high ground here to try and use their archers, but it's a very aggressive push here from BMK, which I'm actually pretty in favour of, because Isengard only have a portion of their army here, and not only that, but well, yeah, if Isengard start to fall apart too early here, it's going to be real bad for the defenders overall. Because Isengard, they may not have their whole army here, but it's still a really big chunk, and if Mirkwood gets through with a decent portion of their manpower intact, that's going to be something else the defenders have to deal with as it bears down upon them. Meanwhile, over on the other side, there is actually another very small gap, very easy to miss these gaps into the tomb, as Eclipse is also going to be doing exactly the same thing here with Numenor, pouring in with all of its manpower very, very quickly. Unlike with Isengard over on the other side, however, Angmar is a little bit further afield, which is a bit of a shame really, because if they had stopped Numenor on this bridge here, they could have utilised a lot of their nasty melee tools as well as their witches to do a lot of damage here, but as it is, Numenor pouring forwards very quickly, and I don't think this force from Angmar is going to have what it takes to hold them back for too long, so the defenders caught a little bit flat-footed here, but certainly this is the part of the map where most of the action is happening so far, and already you can see that Mirkwood, real statement of intent here from Mirkwood to send forward pretty much everything they have right from the off. All of their archers are in position and firing down onto the Isengard position, at least as well as they can. I think they're trying to get side shots into the Isengard core over there, which is fighting on the front line. They're not really able to do that though. So to be fair, the positioning here for Isengard could work out, even if they are fighting uphill against a very dangerous Elven foe. You can also see there the Elders of the Elven King just waiting in the background, the Elder Council firing in as well. I still think that over the long haul, Mirkwood will be able to force their way through here. I just do not think that they'll be able to keep pace with the quality that Mirkwood have in melee. If they do, it won't be because of their abilities in melee, it'll be because of these 2 units of crossbows and the javelins that they've got just in behind the line. But even here you can see that the javelins are really starting to take a lot of damage. The Lurt's hunting pack, not so much a target, but here the elves are doing the right thing. They need to try and cut down these crossbows very quickly. You can see that just a second ago this Uruk-hai archer unit was fairly full, now it's almost completely gone. That's the strength of a fully formed Mirkwood skirmish line here, as they continue to just pour fire into this front line. But these crossbows are having a real impact here. Mirkwood are not really making much in the way of progress. Mirkwood, of course, they do not have a ready-made answer to pikes, which is a problem. That's really the one genuine advantage Isengard have over Mirkwood in melee. Mirkwood do have the Ents to try and counteract that, but the Ents are a little bit isolated here. They're getting into the infantry line. Here come Mirkwood again, though. Mass is not really something the elves can count on all that much, and it seems like BMK is trying to really force the issue here, which is not necessarily the worst idea, but he's really being made to pay for it as the crossbowmen continue to fire away. The Lurt's hunting pack are now also the target of all those Mirkwood archers as well. And time for Isengard, I think, is running out. You can actually see over here as well that a bit of a flanking force from Arthedain, the Royal Court of House Armlaith, and the Grey Company coming into the side. Obviously, Rudauer quite a long way behind Isengard and Angmar's defences here on the flank, so they were free to just come in from the side now. And with the Royal Court and the Grey Company here, you would say that, yeah, Isengard's days are most certainly numbered over on this side. I don't think Lango is going to be able to save all that much either, and there was a lot of stuff he had here. It's going to be quite difficult, I think, for the defenders to continue with this continue sustaining these kind of losses, even if they are Orc factions and evil men. It's going to be difficult if they keep taking losses of this magnitude. It's kind of difficult to see how much Mirkwood have lost. There are dwarves on the front line as well. I'd imagine Mirkwood are fairly well bloodied at this point, just because they've been taking crossbow fire for quite a while at this point. But it will still be worthwhile if they can get in here, because of course they still have the dwarves backing them up, and they should still have the ability to continue that push. Numenor, meanwhile, they decided to pull back a little bit, deciding not to go all in on Angmar over here, perhaps fearing the fact that they could bring the Witchers to carve right through the army. Instead, they're going to be trading blows with individual units for the time being. Mr. Sneakman sending forward the Orc Fellas, but the combination of footmen and pikemen are going to be easily enough to keep them at bay. Obviously, Orc Fellas, the armor piercing is very useful and they are very numerous, but as an individual unit, they don't really work unless they're part of a more cohesive whole. They can be very easily isolated and destroyed because of their really low defensive values. Low armor, no shield, very low melee defense as well as a low tier axeman. You can see now that some upgraded Witch Realm pikemen are coming in, which perhaps should have been committed a little sooner, just to try and really back up the Orc Fellas, because that could have been a winning combination. The Witch Realm pikemen upgraded especially are stronger than the Belagire pikes, and with the added AP of a full unit of Orc Fellas, that would have accounted for the Belagire footmen as well. But as it is, sort of segmenting the army like that, not really going to work out. The Witch Realm pikemen could still do well if they get into a good position, but of course Numenor still have the option of just sending more reinforcements forward. But a little bit interesting actually, you can see there that Arthedain coming forward now, sort of harrying the trolls backwards, and Dwarven Miners also coming forward. It's a little bit interesting actually that Numenor weren't trying to spread out a little bit more, I thought, but if Arthedain and Khazad-dûm are going to come this way instead, then they can just afford to focus on here, keep Angmar a little bit more occupied, continue to push through there. You can see the Royal Court of House Armlaith going after this unit of Uruk-hai archers that are here at the top, and you can see here Isengard now very much on the retreat, trying to get through the narrow canyons that this tomb is made up of. I assume the tomb itself is at the back. It does look as though there is kind of a settlement in here. It's a rather imposing place to live though. Can you imagine getting up in the morning and your first view being these like really spiky mountains just on all sides pressing you in? Not the most cosy environment. Meanwhile, Arthedain continuing to harry Isengard backwards. Isengard, they need to pull back alongside Rudauer at this point, I think. I think they and Angmar, it's a very difficult outer layer here to defend if you're going to do it in this way. I think Rudauer would probably have needed to come forward if they were going to do that as well, so they put up more of a united front. As it was, Arthedain basically had free rein to use their cavalry to just come in from the side and sideswipe Isengard, essentially. They would have lost anyway, Isengard, but they would have been able to do a little bit more damage to Mirkwood, which could be key as the battle goes on. Meanwhile, you can see here Angmar, Halberds and Trolls. There's a little bit of a fight going on out here as well. The Dwarven Miners continuing to press forwards. This may seem like a suicidal move from the Dwarven miners, but it's not actually the worst thing to do. These miners, they are still shock infantry, so they are perhaps a little bit more well placed to deal with isolated trolls than many other kinds of units. But having said that, if they go into a line of Angmar halberds as well as trolls, they're going to get dealt with very, very quickly indeed. More Dwarven miners on the way forwards as Khazad-dûm continue to try and pile the pressure onto this side, or at least begin cranking up the pressure. Meanwhile, Numenor pushing back actually against the Guardians of Kharn-dûm and the Witch Realm Pikemen, and the Seafarers of Nindamos here in support, so that's not really a huge surprise here. Obviously a lot of damage that the Seafarers of Nindamos are able to lay down. 10 missile damage. Armour piercing as well, and they're really going after Angmar here. Angmar, I think the problem is they're spreading themselves a little bit too thin. They've got their lines a little bit too layered. You know, lots of little small layers is not a very good thing. Sort of fewer bigger layers is generally the way to go. You can see here Angmar, I think what they're trying to do is respond in kind with their own thrown projectiles here in the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, but it is also worth saying, of course, the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, they have the prep trait. And so as a result of that, they throw their projectile and then they charge into melee, and trying to get them to use more than one volley essentially is extremely awkward. And I think that maybe is what Mr. Sneakman is falling prey to here, because they're trying to sort of shuffle around a little bit and throw. But as soon as they throw, he might be better off honestly just throwing them in here, because they're pretty decent in melee. They can do a lot of damage with those dual axes, and that may be just what is called for on that Angmar front line with a lot of their other more solid infantry already there. Meanwhile, these Dwarven miners going forward all on their lonesome. Not necessarily the best idea as the Angmar halberds getting into phalanx formation, backed up by a bunch of orc fellas as well, so yeah, these Dwarven miners definitely not going to make much in the way of progress. One of the most basic phalanx units in the game, the Angmar halberds, but if you play right into their hands and allow them to just poke and prod you from a distance in the way that these Dwarven miners will do if they just engage them alone, they can still be very effective. Cheap too. They and the Morannon halberds and the heavy goblin halberds, to be fair, can certainly do their job, even if you don't see them maybe as much as some other kinds of units from those factions. Here you can see the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm trying to push in against these Uruk-hai archers. Not really sure what these Royal Court House Armlaith are doing. They're more likely to just get in the way of the Dwarves as they continue to mulch through these Uruk-hai archers than anything else, to be honest with you. I'm actually surprised these Uruk-hai archers are still in melee, to be honest with you. They're going up against some really solid Khazad-dûm infantry all on their lonesome. They are a really poor unit when it comes to pulling out their blades and getting stuck in. If they can get like a couple of kills on those cavalrymen, that would be a very useful thing to have going into the later stages of this fight. Meanwhile, you can see over here, revealing themselves from their hidden position up on the cliffs here, the Snarga skirmishers, and this is one of the things that a map like this will offer you. It should offer you the chance to really go in hard on some of these higher positions to use your skirmish. You can see here some Dunman Spearmen. There were some Trollshaw Axe Throwers up here as well. I'm not entirely sure what's happening here. I mean, neither of these two units is going to fare too well if you just park them in front of some Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm. They're a very decent unit when it comes to dealing damage, and Trollshaw Axe Throwers, like, he's probably best off retreating them, honestly. I think blindness. Just a unit of basic Rude Hour Archers would be better off placed up there than anything else. Meanwhile, over here, Langer doing exactly that with his Snarga. They are getting shot now by the Hiri Pain, which will be bad for them, obviously. They're going to be absolutely terrible at taking arrow fire. But their javelins, when they hit their mark, they're going to be able to do a lot of damage to this Mirkwood line as it advances forward. BMK trying to continue the momentum of the first layer of the Isengard defense, but he's getting dealt a lot of damage here. You can see how many kills the javelins have gotten already. And the problem, of course, that Mirkwood have here, Uruk-hai pikemen, the basis of this front line. And Mirkwood don't, like I said, they don't really have an answer to pikes in melee like this. They can't just grind their way up against a pike line like some other factions and come out victorious. They will end up losing in that situation, especially against a good quality pike-focused faction like Isengard. But we'll see how Mirkwood get along here. They could do with some assistance from the Dwarves if they're going to continue trying to go about their business in this way. Meanwhile, Angmar still defending further forward, which is fairly admirable. You can see here the Trolls going after the miners as they break up. The Dunedain Troll Slayers are moving forward, which you can tell in the name that the Trolls don't really want to be getting too close to them, not only because of the javelins, but they're really, really good in melee against Trolls as well, just because, of course, again, multiple HP, shock infantry, armour piercing, going to be excellent against those heavily armoured Trolls from Gundabad. Dunedain Peacekeepers moving forward. The Grey Company have taken an awful lot of damage at this point, but they did help break through that Isengard outer layer, so it's certainly not the end of the world. Arthedain going to be taking the lead on that route forward, although possibly there's a few... Oh yeah, I mean, Arthedain for the most part seem to be going through the middle and towards Angmar. Khazad-dûm also sort of spreading themselves out a little bit. You can see there the Trollshaw axe throwers revealing themselves once again, but Trollshaw axe throwers are really, really damaging if you make them target the right units. Like I said, I'm a big fan of axe throwers actually in 0.97. I felt the update would kind of ruin them by taking away their AP, but the higher base damage actually in my mind makes them more focused, certainly, but in that individual area against sort of the kind of targets that archers are usually quite strong against, axe throwers can absolutely devastate them, units like pikes and halberds. But sending them here, like, if they have a weakness, it's going to be against arrows. Trollshaw axe throwers are very weak to arrow fire, they don't have the best armour at all, unshielded. You really don't want to be losing a unit of axe throwers too cheaply. Meanwhile, these Snaga getting more and more damage, but I think at this point actually Merc would have decided to give up on trying to kill this unit because they're using so much of their ammunition on them. As it stands, Mirkwood here, they're trying to burrow into this Isengard front line. 3rd Legion Infantry coming forward to try and support this Mirkwood push, but Isengard are going to be able to hold on here. This attack is going to fail unless they have more reinforcements they're prepared to send forward, which it does look as though they're going to do so now. That attack is going to be repelled by Isengard, which is a credit to how strong Isengard's defence and positioning was. Those hidden Snaga on the hill really doing their job. Meanwhile up here, this bridge near the side of this, it's hard to call it a settlement, it's more like a crater. Angmar still holding on. Actually, Angmar doing very well for themselves at this point, continuing to send reinforcements forward. A unit of Angmar halberds joining the fray. Numenor still not making any progress, but Numenor also, they haven't really committed a huge portion of their army. I think Numenor, they're just biding their time, waiting, making sure that Angmar has to stay engaged up here. And as soon as an attack starts happening down here, that's when some real movement will start to be made, I think. Meanwhile, see here, that looks as though we're actually going to get some action here in the middle, as some Evendim spearmen moving forward. They actually stumble across a unit of Blackwolds, which was hidden in this corner, and they are now going to have to spring their ambush maybe a little bit earlier than they would have wanted. I'm sure that he probably would have wanted a full assault to be happening over here before he charged his Blackwolds into the back of it. But still, it's going to catch these Evendim spears out, and these Evendim spearmen have been sent forward without any sort of support, really. And the Blackwolds are going to absolutely tear them apart, especially with the support of some additional militia spears coming in to help them out. Evendim spearmen are not really going to be up to the task of killing them off. You can also see the Franadine Rangers over there. Franadine Rangers, honestly, this is probably more detrimental to the Rudar cause to use them, because obviously the body piercing will go through the Evendim spears and into the Blackwolds, causing a bit of friendly fire. And just in general, like, Evendim spears are a unit of low enough quality that you really don't want to be using your Rangers on a unit of such lowly stature. Meanwhile, Isengard now actually pulling back. That's an interesting move from Lino. I think, though, it is the right one, because you can see that a lot of reinforcements were coming forward. I think he felt as though this line had already achieved all it was going to be able to do. So he's now going to pull back once again to yet another defensive line, and I can assume that there's going to be another unit of hidden skirmishers up here that you can use to do exactly the same thing once again. And of course, as they're hidden, the Dwarves and Mirkwood don't really have a choice but to go forward and spring this trap. Meanwhile, you can really get a sense of the scale of this particular map, because you always get the sense that Angmar is still effectively defending their first defensive points. Isengard is back to their third. There's almost a danger here that Angmar could get surrounded, but based on the structure of the map, that isn't actually the case. So to surround Angmar, you'd need to get all the way to the back of the settlement and loop back around on yourself. So certainly a very interesting layout to this map, and it looks as though actually Arthedain not going to bother assaulting Angmar from this angle. They're not actually going to bother helping Numenor, so Numenor may very well be on their own here, having to go in effectively a sort of one-on-one here against Angmar, and Angmar with their additional funds and their very dangerous tools like witches should be able to continue to hold this line, you would imagine, but we shall see. What have we here? Warriors of Khazad-dûm and Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm trying to pour some fire into the Rudar front line, trying to whittle down those Rudar swordsmen a bit, and succeeding. They do have shields, but they're not the best quality, just wooden shields, and of course their armour isn't overly thick either. Over here on the front line, meanwhile, Warriors of Khazad-dûm as well as some out-of-ammunition Orc Hunters, once again going up against a combination of Dunman Spearmen and the Blackwolds. The Blackwolds, of course, will be really good against the Dwarves. Heavy AP focus, a lot of damage, and against units like this, they should be very, very comfortable, to be honest with you. You can see now actually the Rudar swordsmen, sick and tired of just being poked and prodded at, are going to charge forward into melee. If they're going to die, it will be with sword in hand. 4th Legion Shield Guard coming over here. And to be honest, there's not really Dwarven reinforcements all that close. I mean, you can see he's moving up some more 4th Legion now, but this is the danger on a big map like this, is the attackers can also start to make a few errors by simply stretching their armies too much, and that may be kind of the issue here. It's certainly the issue with, not this one, with this defensive line over here that Isengard had set up. Like, Mirkwood sent forward a portion of their army, but not enough of it to smash through. And in the end, Isengard was able to isolate and destroy it. Hiri Peng and the Elves of the Elven King are going to move forward now, try and get into position. You can see that Isengard, though, in pulling back, they have actually sort of made a situation for themselves where they need to actually guard 2 choke points rather than just the 1. Interesting indeed. Meanwhile, you can see here the plan of Mirkwood is plain for all to see. They want to get into a position up here on this hill with their archers so they can bombard Rudauer from behind and give the dwarves an easier time pushing through. And they will be able to do that. Honestly, I think the dwarves will probably be just fine regardless. I mean, Rudauer are putting up a fight, but outside of the Blackwolds, who are starting to bleed their manpower away a little bit more, the dwarves are going to have a pretty distinct melee advantage over someone like Rudauer. You can see here the Orc Hunts of Khazad-dûm trying to shoot into the Trollshire Axler as well, and doing a very good job of it. The Trollshire Axler is trying to get into a position to shoot down the Dwarven line, which is a good move if they can get there without getting shredded, and I'm not sure whether they've been able to do that really. In come the axes now, and honestly, again, like, because they're not AP anymore against units like the 4th Legion, the dwarves will be able to mitigate more of that damage than if it was someone else. Meanwhile, here you can see the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders now. You can, ooh, hello. Well, the Witches are here, and they've been grilling, killing off some of the Bawabrim, who have presumably already used their ammunition in this grind fight on the bridge. But now the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders are going to be essentially the rear guard, the Witches, with a couple of volleys in there, but nothing too devastating, just a few Remena dying off. These are the kind of casualties that for now Numenor can sustain. Witch Realm Scourge Raiders will hold for the time being. They probably need a little bit more support actually on the front line, Numenor, because you can see Angmar now at this point, seeing the fact that Arthedain isn't really going to attack from this side, they are going to pull their entire army back through this canyon, and they are instead going to back up the primary defence over here, which obviously is going to be Rudauer here in the middle. Rudauer continuing to fight against Arthedain as well on this thoroughfare. These Evendim Spearmen and these civilians actually have made it quite a long way, and again, much like how the attackers have spread themselves or stretched themselves out a little bit too much, I would also level that criticism at Rudauer, to be honest with you. Like, these layers are too thin to really put up too much of a fight against anything substantial individually, but they're not small enough that losing all of these men will be something that Rudauer can sustain for very long. It's kind of like the worst of both worlds in many ways. Meanwhile, you can see here over on the other side, Rudauer also still struggling against the dwarves, getting forced ever further back. Isengard, meanwhile, I think seeing the danger that letting Mirkwood have this higher position represented, they are going to try and counter-attack, and they're going to counter-attack with some serious units as well. Uruk-hai Berserkers, Trolls of the White Hand, there's a lot more pikemen coming up here as well, preventing the Elder Council from getting into position, although those pikes are still getting shot by the Greenwood Rangers, who for now are still able to fight unhindered. Meanwhile, what's going on here? You can see the Isengard Ballista, I think, was trying to deal damage here to this Dwarven assault, but in the end I think all they really ended up doing was damaging their own men. The Dunlending Clansmen will do very little against Dwarven infantry, but it's going to be the pikes here. I think Isengard, they're just hoping to hold this particular attack at bay. There's also some Rudauer Clansmen, so good to see now that the allies are going to be mixing and matching their armies a little bit, sending resources where they're most needed. The Elder Council are going to struggle here without reinforcements, because these pikes are just going to be able to hold them at bay. You can see here now the Trolls of the White Hand pushing through, stopping those Greenwood Rangers from firing, and they will really struggle here in melee against these heavily armoured juggernauts. Well, there goes Thranduil, butchered by a Berserker. Now he knows what Haldir must have felt like. But yeah, these Elves of the Elven King, they'd be able to kill off the Trolls and the Berserkers individually, but as a unit, especially seeing as the Elves of the Elven King were also, I think, in the sightlines of some of Isengard's ranged units earlier on, so probably a little bit damaged. As a result of all of that, they are actually losing this fight, which is bad news for Mirkwood. Mirkwood must be running low on manpower at this point. You can see here, though, Thranduil Berserkers charging forward, and once again, I would really question Rudauer's decision to take this step. Like, there really is no need. Like, this is one of the strongest infantry units you have as Rudauer, and individually against the Dwarven infantry unit, they should be very good with their AP. A lot of damage on them. But they were sent forward all on their lonesome here, and so the results are going to be rather predictable. They're going to try and get away now, but it's far too late. Like, he's made his bed, he has to lie in it. The guards of Khazad-dûm are here, surrounded by all their Legion units, and they're going to get absolutely trashed on the retreat. Their hit points are also going to be gone. Meanwhile, you can see here the Black Waltz charging into these Orc Hunters. If they still have ammunition, that's a very good catch, actually. These Dunman Spearmen still have a shield wall going on, but I think they need to retreat a little bit faster than this. You can see that Arthedain have also now, with the cavalry in behind the lines, still those Franadine Rangers. The Franadine Rangers, to be fair, must have done a decent amount of damage to Arthedain as they got caught up on those units, but I don't know. You can see there the Seafarers of Nindamos moving forward. Finally, the rear guard from Angmar has been dealt with, and that will of course allow Eclipse and his Númenórean army to attack from this angle as well. And this will lead right back to the same position as well, so essentially this final piece of raised terrain which leads into the primary settlement of DUMGRISTS tomb is going to be where the defenders have to make their final stand. It's been a kind of an interesting match, really. I'm not really sure who I would say is on top at the moment. I'd give the advantage to the attackers, just because the attackers always have a certain kind of innate advantage when they have one more army than the defenders in this sort of situation. And I wouldn't say the defenders have done anything so impressive that they've been able to truly overturn that. Indeed, I think more often than not, the defenders have played into the attackers' hands a little bit by having their defensive lines be a little bit too flimsy, Rudar especially. But the Trolls of the White Hand are finally going to try and finish off the Elves of the Elven King. Not that it will matter too much, this higher ground will still be lost, as the Sons of the Fallen and Mithril Guard are now colliding with these Rudar clansmen. Armour upgraded, but that's not going to help them against the armour-piercing Mithril Guard, now is it? Meanwhile, down here, actually the Dwarves are going to lose this fight. I feel as though that's in large part due to the crossbows that are up on that hill, to be fair. The pikes and these Dunlanders just sort of getting in the way of the Dwarves, pinning them in place for the Isengard crossbows to have their way with them. Very, very nice. Some Uruk-hai Berserkers back there as well, able to save themselves. Interesting, this is a bit chaotic out here now. There's still some Black Bolts getting in the way of the Dwarves. They should fall away fairly soon, to be honest with you, but perhaps even more so, we have these Angmar Trolls just running around and causing havoc, and they will actually be able to get right into these Arthedain marksmen. This will be a very nice catch as well, although there are Dunedain Troll Slayers right in and amongst this mix, so they may be able to kill a fair amount of the Arthedain marksmen here. I suppose that could have been intentional, actually, to maybe try and bait the Trolls forward and then kill them with the Troll Slayers. That would be a very good move if so. I don't want to necessarily imply that was the case. I'll give the player credit for that, because that would be a very clever bait and switch if that was the case. Obviously, Dunedain Troll Slayers in melee are going to be able to monster trolls like this with the amount of damage they can do, but the Trolls are not going to hang around to be in melee with them for any longer than they need to be. They're going to try and get out of melee with them and into melee with something a little bit more comfortable for them to deal with, like the Arthedain Men-at-Arms. There are also some 4th Legion Shield Guard running around over here, so still a little bit disorganised. The defenders definitely need to get themselves into a position here where they can start to recoup some of their losses, I think. The problem with this is Angmar, I think, are going to have to deal with an assault from two sides as Númenor make their way through this narrow canyon. Yet again, the defenders threatening to feed an individual unit into the sort of the full might of the Númenorian army, like a single unit of Witch-Realm Scourge Raiders is going to accomplish very little against this combined arms assault from Númenor. It's just not really going to work out as well as they would hope, I think. There's this rather interesting sort of bubble of terrain which Angmar can use to their advantage if they so choose. There are also the Witchers, the Witchers, again, much like how I criticise Erebor for being far too forgiving, the Witchers allow, Angmar are very forgiving because of the Witchers in a siege as well. You can make some pretty horrendous errors and still sort of bring yourself back into contention with Angmar based just on the Witchers alone. We'll see if that's the case here. You can see here the Isengard Ballista trying to carve into the Dwarven manpower a little bit more, and I would actually say that Isengard in particular of all the defenders has probably done the best job. They've been a little bit more organised than the other two, and they've been able to do more damage to Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood than to the armies on the other side. I think Arthedain in particular have had a pretty easy ride up until now. That's a bad sign for the defenders as well, because Arthedain, I should say, have got the most disposable manpower, which is always going to be a useful thing to have in a final assault like this. And again, having very little in the way of elves left is also going to be quite a lot of comfort, I would imagine, to the defenders, not having to deal with that. So, Numenor, how are they going to choose to deal with this? Because this is a very weird situation to be in. I would imagine that this sort of blob is not intentional from the map maker, whoever that may be. Angmar Halberds will be forming. The Seafarers are going to come forward. The Seafarers could do a huge amount of damage to the Angmar Halberds. But how Numenor decide to approach this is going to be very interesting. Because of course, as soon as they commit forward too much, the Witches will poke around the corner and destroy it. If they don't commit enough, Angmar will be able to hold them at bay indefinitely with their pikes and halberds. However, Angmar also have to deal with an assault coming from the other side, from Arthedain. For now, it's only made up of out-of-ammunition marksmen, but that will escalate, I would imagine, to include stronger units. And over here you can see all of these are axemen, halberdiers and pikemen. And that is good eating for the Dunedain Rangers. They're going to be able to shred right through them. You can see there are Ettenmore's troll hunters up on the side as well. And this is the thing that the defenders can use to their advantage. They still have the superior defensive position, and they still have units like this, which are going to be able to do a lot of damage. But again, I think Blindness does strike me as the sort of player who is a bit over-eager to use his skirmishers, because he's using there his Ettenmore's troll hunters, the units which could bring his team back into contention, and he's dumping the ammunition into a unit of dying Arthedain marksmen. It's not a choice I would make. You got to ration your ammunition appropriately. You got to use it on the right kind of units. Like over here would be the place to use it. There are Meteor Guard banging on the door, as well as 3rd Legion and Guards of Khazad-dûm. If you can get your javelins into a position on either side to shoot into them, which you could, that would be the best use for them. Because when the Dwarven Elite Infantry gets rolling, it's really very, very difficult to stop them. As it is, Isengard are trying to do that, but these crossbows are so depleted at this point that their DPS is going to be very low. Rudauer, I think they also need to send in their enslavers. They do have an opportunity here to really cripple the Dwarven Elite Corps. Whether they take it or not is another matter. Because I think that's the strongest point of the assault happening so far. You can see that Arthedain coming forward. There goes the Isengard General at the hands of the Guards of Khazad-dûm, which is not too surprising. Dunedain Peacekeepers and Arthedain Men-at-Arms taking point over here, and most of this is made up of Dunman Spearmen. If not for the Franodyne Pikemen, they would be really struggling to hold on here, Rudauer, here in the middle. Meanwhile, over here, you can see there are Dunedain Trollslayers heading towards the front line, and with all of these arrows coming in, Arthedain should be making some real progress there. Meanwhile, the Witchers still just biding their time as Numenor engage with the Angmar forces. Most of it made up of just halberds and orc fellas again, so Angmar most certainly going for a more numbers-focused army for this particular battle. And that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, because of course it's a lot of orcs to try and slice your way through if you're the attacker. And it's a lot of men to just get in the way of all of the Witchers. Still a few units just sort of waiting, biding their time here for Angmar. But Angmar really getting forced onto the back foot now. Now is when, yeah, you can see there Franodyne Berserkers coming forward. Now is when you want, now that there's Troll Slayers there, that's exactly the sort of target you want to go up, shoot into. Franodyne Rangers, I assume that's what they're doing, but again, only 16 of them left. Not the most. Over here, some Witch Realm Scourge Raiders trying to get into the action. You can see there the Witch Realm Enslavers did get into melee, and that has turned fortunes around on this front line. You can actually see as well that there is the Uruk-hai Berserkers as well, so between the Berserkers and the Enslavers, that's a lot of AP, it's a lot of quality, and the Dwarves have been stopped dead in their tracks. See, way over there are the Greenwood Rangers and the Elders of the Elven King, but I think they're actually shooting the Trolls, which the defenders won't mind in the slightest. The Trolls, the White Hand, also wading right into melee here. And they're going to be able to do a lot of damage themselves. They will probably end up dying in here though. Like something like the Meteor Guard is going to do a lot of damage to Trolls, but this should be the end here of this Dwarven assault, which is good news for the defenders, because if it wasn't, they would probably be fearing the worst here, but the attackers need to be careful. If they end up throwing too much of their manpower under the bus, this fight could turn sour for them very quickly indeed. Again, this Halberd Fella combination, which Angmar have going on, has been pretty effective here at holding the enemy at bay, but I mean, when you're up against a unit like Troll Slayers and when you're taking shots from the side, there's only so long that basic orc units like that are going to last. How are Numenor getting along? Because more and more it's looking kind of like Numenor need to be the ones to... In the late game, I think Numenor are going to have to be the ones to put the team on their back and carry them to victory, because Mirkwood and Khazad-dûm are going to have lost too much, and Arthedain don't necessarily have the quality left to see them over the line. Numenor might, but Numenor won't if those witches get a hold of them in the right way. So a pretty tense finish to this fight here in the final phases. Trollslayers now getting destroyed, actually. They must be the Franadine Rangers. It's the only thing that's shooting at them. They're taking damage pretty quickly here. Meanwhile, Dunedain Peacekeepers actually routing, and this is where Arthedain, they're making the same mistakes as well, the attackers that the defenders made earlier on. They're filtering, their waves are too small. Again, waves and layers, they need to be big if they're going to be effective. If they're too small, then they're just going to either crumble if it's a layer, or just bounce right off the defences if it's a wave. Arthedain Marksman coming over here. Still some Wardens of the North over there, a nice good quality unit. Witch-Arm Scourge Raiders still in here, but these Dwarven attackers, too late are they going to see reinforcements, and also it's only from Arthedain Marksman. I think actually the Arthedain Marksman have arrived just as the final Dwarves are getting cleaned up. There's the Royal Court of House Armlaith hoping to weasel their way into the heart of this defence, but I'm not sure they're going to, I'm not sure they necessarily want to. I mean, there's pikemen all over the place in here. Franadine Pikes, Zettenwall's Troll Hunters as well, so they're probably going to try and go after the Ballista if they get in here, but surrounded by pikes and javelins and spears as it is, probably not going to happen. There's Arthedain Pikemen. Yeah, I mean, there's not much left. I mean, Arthedain here, they're going over here to try and back up their Troll Slayers once again, but I think they've been bamboozled a little bit here, Arthedain, hoping to maybe support Numenor from behind. Is that Arthedain's general? Maybe. But Arthedain taking a lot of damage from up on the hill here. And that is costing the attackers pretty badly. The Royal Court of House Armlaith are able to get in behind enemy lines. And they're actually going after this depleted unit of Uruk-hai archers, but I don't think Isengard will mind that too much, as long as they're not going after anything too important. And there you can see the Attenwall's Troll Hunters loosing their javelins into this blob of Arthedain men-at-arms. They, however, are taking a huge amount of damage there from Wardens of the North and Dunedain Rangers. So a lot of damage to take. Forward come the Franadine Pikemen, which will give the cavalry pause. These trolls are still alive, which I'm actually surprised about. I think it's because the Mithril Guard and Guards of Khazad-dûm died off reasonably quickly. So they haven't really... There are a few dead ones, but now that the dismounted Knights of the Lumens are getting to the front line, you see one fall there. They're not going to last too much longer, these trolls, I don't think. Meanwhile, another Arthedain assault here, as they continue to try and batter down this frontal defence. They're definitely not going to manage it with that kind of force, though. What about Numenor? Well, I mean, something of note has happened here, clearly, because there's a huge amount of death over here, which suggests the Witches were able to get at least a volley off, but the Witches are now dead, so Numenor, with how much they have left, I mean, considering the Witches were there, they've gotten away with that fairly well, I think, actually, Numenor. Moving into the late game here, they do have a decent force, which they can bring to bear to the defenders. Will it be enough to seal victory? You can see here, Arthedain is still putting up a good fight over here, actually, and without any sort of range support now. It's going to be on the Witch-Arm Blackguard to try and kill them off, but I don't think they'll kill them off quickly enough, and Numenor will probably sandwich them. That's the last thing the defenders are going to want in this particular situation. Here we can see Arthedain Pikemen. There's the Isengard Ballista as well, trying to shoot in to the Numenor blob as they get into position, but now the cavalry has managed to get into the Ballista crew. Over here things are still going pretty well for the attackers, I would imagine. Well, no. Witch-Arm Enslavers now forced onto the back foot, and I think it's because of the support from the Wardens of the North there. Uruk-hai archers are trying to respond to them, but multiple HP Uruk-hai archers don't necessarily do the most damage. Isengard Ballista is going to be very key here, I think, going into the final phases of this fight for the defenders. Arthedain Pikemen holding down the front. What have we here? The Dunedain Peacekeepers are fighting hard on the front line, but against something like the Witchround Blackguard, it's always going to be difficult for them to lay down their full effectiveness. Here you can see the Isengard Ballista trying to do some real damage to the Númenóreans, but actually succeeding only in routing a pocket of their own resistance here. And again, Angmar, they don't really have a full defence that they can put in front of Númenor here. The only reason Númenor are not moving forward with everything here is to avoid getting punished by that Ballista. But as soon as this unit of Witchround Scourge Raiders is out of the way, which won't take too long I would imagine, armour upgrade or no, then Númenor I imagine are going to try and pour forward with all of their might as quickly as they possibly can. Arthedain's frontal assault is starting to collapse now. These Arthedain pikemen at a disadvantage when facing the Hranadyne pikemen. Forward come the Wardens of the North. Númenor do need to hurry a little bit though, because their allies, and by allies I mean ally really, in the shape of Arthedain, is starting to struggle. They don't have much more that they can really give. Dunedain Rangers fighting hard. Rudar clans. I mean, the Wardens of the North are really strong in melee, so it will take a response from the defenders to deal with them, I think. But yeah. So I think Froggy was actually the player who fell first, because I did notice those Greenwood Rangers still alive, scurrying around back there. So Khazad-dûm actually the first army to fall. But will it matter in the long run? Because I think, honestly, I think with the strength that Númenor still have left, I think the attackers have probably got this. The Narun Aru Sentinels taking point, which is a weird place for them to be. Hranadyne Rangers trying to do some damage on the approach, but again, there's only so much they can achieve with only 12 men left. This Arthedain force is finally sort of grinding to a halt, really. There was Witchround Blackguard in there. The Witchround Blackguard is such a strong unit, and when backed up with pikes, it's a very, very scary thing to try and face. Rudauer now going to try and plug the gap. I will give Rudauer credit, despite me not being the biggest fan of the earlier layout. I think as the fight has got into this final phase, I think Rudauer has responded quite well actually to the attackers as they've come. But I don't know if it's going to be enough going into the late game here, because I don't know if Rudauer, at this point, it's less a matter of tactics and formations, and just I don't think Rudauer have got the quality to withstand Númenor at this point. Like a completely fresh unit of Pharazim Swordmasters and Narun Aru Sentinels, augmented by a bunch of Romena units, is not the sort of thing you want to see charging towards you in the late game. And here you can see, over here, Dunedain Rangers and Wardens of the North are going to be defeated here in the long run. Witch-Arm Enslavers still there after all. But they're going to take some dealing with, and by the time they do, might already be all over. Here you can see the Witch-Arm Blackguard and Pikemen victorious, are now going to sandwich the Arthedain Pikemen, I think, and finish off this assault, and then maybe they're going to try and deal with Númenor. And if they can deal with everyone else quickly enough, the defenders probably will have what it takes to face Númenor. But I mean, it's very dependent on how the other fights on the battle go, because this clump of spears is not going to be enough to deal with the Swordmasters. I believe this ballista at this point is probably out of ammunition, because they're just pushing the artillery pieces in the way of Númenor, just sort of trying to get something in the way of them to stall their advance. Seafarers of Nindamos just there in the background in support. Still those Hranadyne Berserkers throwing their projectiles as well. I mean, Númenor don't have the biggest army left, to be fair, and there's still units like Blackguard and Enslavers to deal with, so maybe I've underestimated the defenders here a little bit. Maybe they do have enough. Wouldn't that be a turn-up? Wardens of the North still fighting hard here on the front line, but they're not going to be victorious over here, not by a long shot. So these, again, they'll have more reinforcements coming over from this side that Númenor will have to deal with. Those Ballistae just right in the way now. Hranadyne Berserkers, only 22 of them, but a unit of that quality. 22 is a pretty significant number, and also the Hranadyne Pikemen coming forward now as well, so it's not as if Númenor will be able to depend on the might of the Narun Aru Sentinels alone. Witchround Blackguard moving into view as well. Here comes the Seafarers of Nindamos. They're going to try and immediately they make a beeline for the Witchround Blackguard, trying to finish them off, which is very understandable, I would say. Uruk-hai archers firing away. Again, a very small unit, but any kills they can get at this point would be very, very useful. The attackers still have anything left over here other than those very depleted units? Yeah, I mean, this is all Merc would have left. Not an awful lot. ones in the North. Bouncer forces is evenly matched. It would be very surprising if the ones in the North were able to pull out a victory here, I think. Meanwhile, those seafarers, I think they must be out of ammunition now. They've pulled out their shields and axes. Can Numenor win this? I mean, the Pharazim Swordmasters and the Naran Sentinels together are an incredibly potent force. But do they have enough support around them to deal with the numbers that the defenders still have left? And it's not as if the defenders have got nothing but trash left either. They still have Blackguard, they still have Pyranodyne Berserkers, they still have Witchram Enslavers if they actually end up beating the Wards of the North over on the other side. But this fight is definitely on a razor's edge at this point. Over here, meanwhile, you can see that Rudauer flanking around from the other side, so this is where their defence that was in the middle has gone. They brought a unit of Rudauer clansmen over here. Rudauer clansmen with the armour upgrade, but the Seafarers of Nindamos, well, they're a little bit depleted, but the Rudauer clansmen will need help, I think, to win this particular fight, and I think that's why the Witchram Blackguard left that front line and are now moving around. There's the Isengard Ballista crew. So I think that's what the defenders are trying to do now, trying to search and destroy all of the attackers. Roman and Ardukadar getting onto the front line as well. What are the Witchram Blackguard doing? They're going that way. Well, that's an interesting move because that will probably be the end of this unit of Rudauer clansmen. It will at least prevent any immediate reinforcements heading to this front line over here, though, which Numenor are winning fairly convincingly at this point now that the Witchram Blackguard are not there. The decision to take them off the front line could be a very, very costly one. The Wards of the North at this point, victory seems certain. Witchram Enslavers are retreating and going over to the other side. But they still need to deal with the Wards of the North here. I'm sensing a little bit of indecision creeping into the defenders here. They need to form up their defensive lines, flank around, and no nonsense, just try and squash the attackers now. Because I think, honestly, the way that this fight has gone in the late game, if the defenders don't go on to win it, they really should have. They have the attackers right where they want them, I think. Now the Wards of the North defeat is a distinct possibility. Getting sandwiched will finally put an end to that with the Witchram Blackguard. The Witchram Enslavers going over to the other side. But I mean, this is a worry, I think, for the defenders because things are spiralling a little bit out of control for them. The Pharazim Swordmasters and the Naran Sentinels just absolutely butchering the defence that was placed over here. And 21 enslavers at this point I don't think is going to be enough to reverse their fortunes. The Uruk-hai archers doing their best, but they will also continue to struggle. Romena Abarim. Yeah, these Rudauer clansmen, they've got decent numbers to them, but they too are not going to be able to win this particular fight. Unfortunately for them, their fate is looking ever more sealed. And then, of course, that will free up all of these Numenorians to then go where they please. Here we can see some Romena Abarim that have pushed their way through the front line, and they will now be able to deal with the Uruk-hai archers. There goes that very strange death animation where the Model T poses and goes in 2D into the floor. Rudauer clansmen now retreating from the front line, sensing the fact that the defenders are going to win over here. So the defenders will win over here, the attackers will win over there, they will meet in the middle. And the final fate of this particular settlement. Interesting as well. I don't know who's going to win at this point. I mean, the Naru and Aru Sentinels are a big factor going into the late game now. Those pikes, like the Pharazim Swordmasters as well, are still very healthy. They've absolutely monstered this fight in the late game. The Rudauer clansmen are shaken. They will break fairly soon, and yeah, honestly, it's not looking good for the attackers, the defenders rather. The attackers, on the other hand, Numenor may very well have enough to see themselves over the line here. Having had to deal with the Witches as well, they're probably quite pleased about that. There goes the Rudauer General, the Enslavers run through by a Swordmaster. There goes the Arthedain General then. So again, the attackers and the defenders matching each other blow for blow here actually as the match goes on, as they have done throughout the entire match really. Rudauer is sort of siphoning off more and more men to try and stop Numenor's rather inevitable advance, leaving the dregs of Arthedain for Angmar to deal with. So I think Numenor are the last ones left alive.
throw a minute about him here as well, whatever. But really, the main event is going to be the Sentinels and the Swordmasters, as I've said. I think Numenor have got this, honestly. They've won this fight over here, so they're going to be able to go around from the side. I think that the defenders, they had the opportunity there to win it, I think, but a little bit of indecision just gripped them. And I think that is ultimately what is going to end up costing them the battle here. They are ahead by 2%, the attackers. And I think now it's just a case of an honourable death for the defenders. Because it wasn't a bad defence, honestly, but I think they'll be kicking themselves, I think, over losing one too many units early on, I think, the defenders. But we shall see. I mean, the Blackguard are good, but I don't think they're good enough to completely turn this fight around, unless Rudour have got some Reforged javelins hidden away somewhere, which is always a possibility, I suppose. But unless they have that, I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be a day for evil to savour. What happened to the others? Is this everything that Numenor have? No, there they are. Okay, they're on the way up. I wondered where they disappeared to. But this is the defenders' best chance, honestly. Force this engagement early and hope you can kill off enough of them that those other reinforcements back there are not enough to win this fight. But yeah, the Rudour clansmen, they were actually winning that fight for a second there, but with their whole army gone, the men of Rudour, their courage is lost. They are now fleeing for the hills. This is not something that Witcher Blackguard will have to deal with. They will stand and fight to the bitter end. And I think, I'm sure that's it. I don't think there's anything left. There is one Witcher left alive. Is he? Yeah, he's just the officer, unfortunately, for Mr. Sneakman. If he was a sort of one of the Witchers that actually fired the projectiles, that would have been a very interesting addition to the late game. But no, very well played actually to Numenor here in this case, because they were able to pull their team out of the fire there, because Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood ran out of steam earlier, thanks to Isengard's defences. Arthedain then, as a result, were not able to sustain the attack here alone. And eventually, when Numenor arrived on the scene, all of their allies were already pretty much on their knees or completely dead. But they still had the strength to deal with that. But it was quite a strange battle in many ways. I do feel as though you have to give the MVP to Numenor, though, just because they're the ones that won the match. I think Isengard deserve a lot of credit, though, as well. Like, Isengard did a lot of damage to Mirkwood and Khazad-dûm on the way through. There's always room for improvement. But yeah, I think that ultimately what ended up costing the defenders this one was just Rudour and Angmar in particular. They layered their defences too much. They had too many smaller layers when they could have done with just fewer bigger layers. And I think that would have saved them enough manpower that they would have won this in the late game. But I have to say, a unit that has certainly impressed me in this fight has been the Pharazim Swordmasters. They've been absolute monsters here in the late game, carving right through what was left of the defence. Let's see here. You see Pharazim Nindamos just hanging out, letting this fight take its natural course. Interesting fight though, interesting map as well. I feel as though this map would probably work better in a 4v4. Just because there's so much space to cover inside this natural fortress, as it were, that I think 4 defenders would probably have an easier time of it than 3. But even so, it's a very good map actually, I do like it, and best of all, it didn't crash, so that implies that all of the changes I've made, as well as this being a map which has fewer potentially problematic assets on it, that makes me feel an awful lot better about things moving forward. I still think a big test of that will be the Witch King's Sanctum map, which I will be doing at some point in the next week or so. But we shall see. As for here, there goes the Witch King's subordinate. Indeed. Only 1% in it in the end, so very, very close indeed. That 1% is primarily made up of Pharazim Swordmasters though, so a good 1% to have. I would give the attacking MVP to Numenor just because they were the ones that ultimately ended up winning the fight. I don't think Mirkwood and Khazad-dûm did anything wrong by being as aggressive as they were per se. They just ran out of manpower a little bit earlier than they would have liked. And that mainly is due to Isengard's good play than their poor play. And it's a similar story with Arthedain. Like, Arthedain came forward and they did everything they were supposed to, but when their ally, well, when the Dwarves and the Elves started to fall apart and when Numenor was still lagging a little bit further behind, they were kind of on their own, and they ended up taking the brunt of most of the defending skirmishes, which is always a pretty painful place to be. Then we have Isengard, I think, who was the MVP for the defenders. Very, very well played, and didn't fall prey to the sort of the many small wave-based defence that the other two fell into a little bit, I think. Let's have a look at what did the damage for Numenor, though. The Pharazim Swordmasters doing very, very well in melee at the end, of course. Rumen and Nardukadar breaking 200 kills, of course. It is worth taking a lot of these numbers with a pinch of salt as well, though, because, of course, a lot of the time Numenor were going up against a relatively low-quality Angmar force, so units like Seafarers and Indamos getting 211 is... to be fair, most of these numbers are not too outlandish, but most of them are on stuff like Angmar Halberds and Orc Fellas and Guardians of Kharn-Dûm, which are okay, of course, but nothing overly impressive. Anyway, big thank you to Eclipse for sending this replay in. I know that he's been very eager for me to do one, but of course, like I said, it's very difficult for me to keep maintaining my channel in the way that I'm doing so for now, but I'm still managing it, and I think that the end of my last video I was sort of on a bit of a downer because of how awkward the last battle was to record because of all the crashes. Hopefully that isn't going to be an issue moving forward and I can just get back into business as usual. So let's hope that that's the case, because I do, I will be honest in the fact that, recently, because of all of that and how tired I've been, I haven't really been enjoying it to the same level that I used to with regards to doing these replays. But hopefully now that things are sort of back into the groove of things, I can go back to how things were, and everything will be okay again. Regardless, I do hope you enjoyed this battle, and I think the next one, it probably won't be the Witch King Sanctum next. There are a few battles that I can do. I've got an Osgiliath siege, I've got a few other sieges, I've got some new maps as well, which hopefully won't be too crash happy. The Witch King Sanctum I think I'll be saving for my next bigger recording session. But yeah, I'm not sure. We shall see. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.